Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome into the Storehouse in Northern Ireland. It's a very wet and windy day here, but we're safe and well, and we're so thankful that you've joined us online. Tonight, I want to go to one of my favourite books, the book of Nehemiah. And we're going to chapter 6. Nehemiah chapter 6. And the title for tonight is simply, Oh No. Oh no, and it'll become clear later. So we're going to read the passage first of all, Nehemiah chapter 6 and verses 1 to 10. Now when it was reported to Sanballat, Tobiah, to Geshem the Arab, and to the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall, and that no breach remained in it, although at that time I had not set up the doors and the gates. Then Sanballat and Geshem sent a message to me, saying, Come, let's meet together at Shiphrah, one of the villages in the plain of Ono. But they were planning to harm me. So I sent messengers to them, saying, I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? They sent messages to me 4 times in this manner, and I answered them in the same way. Then Sanballat sent a servant to me in the same manner, a 5th time, with an open letter in his hands. In it was written, It is reported among the nations, and Gamshu says that you and the Jews are planning to rebel. Therefore, you are rebuilding the wall, and you're to be their king according to these reports. You have also appointed prophets to proclaim in Jerusalem concerning you, a king is in Judah. And now it will be reported to the king according to these reports. So come now, let's take counsel together. Then I sent a message to him saying, Such things as you are saying have not been done, but you are inventing them in your own mind. For all of them were trying to frighten us, thinking they'll become discouraged with the work, and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. So there we have it. So let's just reread verses 3 and 4. So I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? And they sent messages to me 4 times in this manner, and I answered them in the same way. So what's gone on? What's been happening? Well, we know that Nehemiah was a contemporary of the other character Ezra that we meet in the Bible. And Nehemiah had been cupbearer to the Persian king in the Persian palace. And we know also from chapter 1 how God put it in Nehemiah's heart to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Do you remember Hanani had come back from a visit to Jerusalem, and Nehemiah had inquired about his people and about the situation there. And when he heard about how the walls had been destroyed and burnt, the gates burnt, he was distraught, and he set himself to fast and to pray. And then God gave him this vision that you're the one to go and rebuild the walls. And you can follow that thread through the first 5 chapters. That's what he's been doing. Now, to build again the walls of Jerusalem and to raise up the gates that had been burned with fire was indeed in itself a task of the highest magnitude. And it certainly called for the unanimous support of all God's people. And indeed, they rallied together wonderfully. It says in chapter 2, verse 18, it says they strengthened their hands for the good work. What kind of work was it? It was called a good work because it was a God work. It was his plan. So in Nehemiah 6, we discover that things had been going well for Nehemiah, and they were just days from seeing the vision completed. Now look at chapter 6, verse 1 again. The wall's basically done except for the gates. It says, I had finished rebuilding the wall, and no gaps remained, though we had not yet hung doors in the gates. So this is like you doing a new build, building a new house for yourself and moving in, but your front door and your back door are still not in place. How comfortable would you feel going to sleep at night? Not very, especially if you live in a dangerous part of town. We like to lock our doors, close them at least. So yeah, we could say Nehemiah is almost there, but not quite. It was still a dangerous situation. So it would be dangerous for him to get sidetracked or abandon the project. And that's exactly what the enemy wanted Nehemiah to do. And so they invite him to the plain of Ono. Sanballat and Geshem knew that if they could lure Nehemiah to the plain of Ono, about 20 miles away from Jerusalem, then they could ambush and kill him on the way, and that would be the end of the vision. But Nehemiah was wise, and he sensed the danger. He was tuned into God. He sensed the danger. He says, they were scheming to harm me. And so basically, Nehemiah says, oh no, to oh no, oh no. But listen to Nehemiah's response in verse 3 of chapter 6. He says, it's basically a verse that I think we should all underline and circle. That's what I've done. And highlight and then underline it again just to be sure. He says, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. I think that's a verse we all need to keep in front of us. I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. You see, the enemy, the devil, is still today prowling around like a roaring lion. Isn't that what Peter said in 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 8 to 9? He says, be of sober spirit, be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. But resist him, standing firm in the faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brethren who are in the world. And again, Paul put it this way when he was talking to the Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14 reveals that Satan masquerades even as an angel of light. He disguises himself as an angel of light. It comes with enticing promises and flattering words, assuring us that what he proposes will cost us nothing, but as lies. And Paul wants us not to be ignorant. In fact, a few verses earlier on, in 2 Corinthians 2:11, Paul had said this about the enemy. He says, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. So we can't afford to be ignorant of his devices. If we don't want to be taken advantage of, let's not be ignorant of his devices. Let's be tuned in like Nehemiah and know the voice of the enemy, the voice of the stranger. Let's know it's not of God. In fact, throughout the whole rebuilding process, the whole rebuilding of the walls, the enemy used different devices and different tactics, and he worked through people. And Satan will try every trick in his arsenal to get you to come down, to get you sidetracked, to keep you off your wall. But what we need to do is to stay with what God has given to us. See, Nehemiah ran into opposition the very moment he downloaded the vision. As soon as he set his heart to obey God's commands to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, he faced difficulty. And then when he reached Jerusalem itself, enemies rose up in the form of Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. They're mentioned right in chapter 2, verse 10. If you turn there, that's where they're mentioned. We only start at the book, and here they pop up. It says in chapter 2, verse 10, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about it, that was the plan to build the wall, it was very displeasing to them that someone had come to seek the welfare of the sons of Israel. And if you go down to verse 19 in chapter 2, they start to mock Nehemiah. It says, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard it, they mocked us and despised us and said, "What is this thing you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king?" So I answered them and said to them, "The God of heaven will give us success. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. But you have no portion, right, or memorial in Jerusalem." I love that answer. And I think it's what we need to note well, how he did respond. Basically, his response was threefold. One, he put his faith in God. The God of heaven will give us success. Two, he put his faith into action. Therefore, we, his servants, will rise up and build. And third, he put the enemy in his place. You have no portion, right, or memorial here. He put his faith in God, he put his faith into action, and he put the enemy in place. And when the construction then was taking place, we find that their anger grew. And you can read of it in chapter 4 if you skip over to chapter 4, verse 1. It says, when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews. So they all join in and they ridicule the effort to rebuild the walls. He says, what are these feeble Jews doing? Are they going to restore it for themselves? Can they offer sacrifices? Can they finish in a day? Can they revive the stones from the dusty rubble, even the burned ones? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was near him, and he said, even what they're building, if a fox would jump on it, he would break their stone wall down. See, the enemy, even today, still loves to remind us of our weaknesses. What are these feeble Jews doing? He loves us to think that we're feeble. What are these feeble Jews doing? And again, how does Nehemiah respond? And how do you respond? Well, verse 4, here's what he does. Then I prayed, hear us, O God, for we are being mocked. There's the answer. Then I prayed. Then I prayed. Nehemiah didn't make any snappy remarks back at them. He simply prayed to his God. After all, isn't God big enough to handle the situation? Isn't he wise enough to know how to deal with them? Then I prayed. So far they've used fear, they've used mockery, scorn, intimidation to demoralize and discourage the builders, to get them to quit God's work. But Nehemiah's prayer foiled Satan's attempts to discourage them. For it says in verse 6, at last the wall was completed to half its height around the entire city, for the people had worked with enthusiasm. But Satan doesn't give up that easy. And so he went a step further. Later again in chapter 4, verse 7 to 8, we read, now when Sanballat, Tobiah the Arabs, the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repair of the wall of Jerusalem went on, and that the breaches began to be closed, they were very angry. All of them conspired together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause a disturbance in it. Well, how did Nehemiah respond this time? The next verse says, but we prayed to our God, and because of them we set up a guard against them day and night. Again, we prayed. He prays, he sets a watch, and he keeps on working. It seems so simple, doesn't it? I think we really underestimate the power of prayer. Then I prayed, then I prayed, then I prayed. That was Nehemiah. We need to remind ourselves, even today, as James says, the prayers of a righteous man are powerful and effective. They are powerful. And the enemy still continues to threaten. Chapter 4, verse 11. Our enemies said, they'll not know or see until we come upon them, kill them, and put a stop to the work. So it's getting a bit more ominous now. They're getting more aggressive. They're talking about killing them and derailing the work. And again, that reminded me exactly what Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 10, where he says, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But then he offers and says, I have come that you may have life and have it abundantly. So Nehemiah rises up and he rallies the troops again, verse 14. Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. So those are instructions for each one of us too. In whatever situation you're in tonight, don't be afraid. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. Remember the Lord. That's the key. Keep your eyes on God. Keep your focus on Him all the time. We're told if we're going to run this race of faith, the race is set before us, what do we need to do? We need to fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the finisher, the perfecter of our faith. Now, in chapter 6, where we started tonight, the enemy suddenly changes tactics. He's resorting now to friendliness and persuasion. They invite him to a conference down on the plain of Ono. But as we've seen, Nehemiah responds with those words, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you? And it says 4 times he got the same message. And each time he gave the same answer. Nehemiah stood firm. And again, that's what we need to do. We need to stand firm. That's what Paul said to us in Ephesians chapter 6. I'm going to read to you from verse 11. It says, put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. Verse 13, therefore take up the full armor of God so that you'll be able to resist in the evil day, and having done everything to stand firm. Verse 14, stand firm therefore, having girded the loins of truth, and so on. He goes on through the different bits of armor 3 times, and that's a few verses. Stand firm. So what do we need to do when we face opposition? Like Nehemiah, stand firm. Same words were repeated to different churches. Paul said the same to Philippi. He said the same to Thessalonica and also to Corinth. 1 Corinthians 16:13. He said, be on the alert. Stand firm in your faith. Act like men. Be strong. But stubborn Sanballat continued demanding a meeting with Nehemiah. Bible says he sent the same message to him 4 times, and 4 times he got the same response. And the enemy still will use subtle deception and plausible sounding appeals. But we need to know his intent is always to destroy us. So you too may be experiencing pressure, continuing pressure to change your mind and go along with something that you know is wrong. Some of us may give in with repeated pressure. We might decline and stand firm the first time and say no. But then we find our defenses weaken as the enticements continue. But Nehemiah, he persists. He persists in his refusal because he knows what his priorities are. I am doing a great work. It's a great project. It's God's project. And if I leave it, it will be threatened. No matter what our purpose is in life, we all have a high calling. We all have a holy calling. And we ought never to give allegiance to anything less. Don't get sidetracked. Don't lose your focus. I was reading, and I'm sure you maybe remember back to 1972. I vaguely remember hearing it in the news, but I was reminded of it when I read it there the other day. It was about the cold, cool December evening way back in 1972. An Eastern Airlines L1011 jumbo jet slammed into the Florida Everglades, killing over 100 people. And the terrible accident was one of the worst aviation disasters in the history of the United States. Everything had been happening routine in the flight until its approach into Miami Airport. But during its final approach, the crew noticed that one green light had failed to illuminate. A light that indicates whether or not the nose landing gear has extended successfully. The pilots discontinued their approach, set the aircraft into circling holding pattern over the pitch black Everglades, and they turned their attention towards investigating this problem. And they became so preoccupied with their search that they failed to realize that the plane was gradually descending closer and closer towards that dark swamp below. And by the time that they noticed what was happening, it was far too late to avoid the disaster. Well, after the accident happened, the investigators, of course, tried to determine the cause. The landing gear had indeed lowered properly. The plane was in perfect mechanical condition. Everything was working properly. All except one thing: a single burned out light bulb. That tiny bulb, worth about 12 cents, I said, started a whole chain of events that ultimately led to the tragic death of over 100 people. Now, of course, the malfunctioning light bulb didn't cause the accident. It happened because the crew lost their focus and put it on something they thought mattered more. So the message from this to me and to you is to set your heart on the things that matter most. I am doing God's work. I am doing a great work. I have a holy calling. I have a high calling. And my focus is there. And right through chapter 6, that enemy persists and even steps it up. I noticed this. He starts, first of all, with isolation. He thinks, get Nehemiah to leave the people and leave the work. Let's isolate him. And that's dangerous. The enemy will try to isolate you. Then he tries insinuation. He starts to question his motives and create uncertainty. That's verses 5 through to 9. Some people are saying, it's reported among the nations. Have you ever heard that? Somebody's saying, someone says. That usually means I'm saying or I am thinking. That's the psychology really behind it. It's reported among the nations, and Gamshu says that you and the Jews are planning to rebel. Therefore you're rebuilding the wall. And you're going to be their king according to these reports. See, they intended to attack Nehemiah's character and his motives. But Nehemiah, he just says, look, such things as you're saying are simply not true. You're inventing them in your own mind. All they were trying to do was to frighten them, thinking they'll become discouraged with the work. Nehemiah could see it, and the work won't be done. And he says, oh God, strengthen my hands. So they try to isolate him, and then they try to insinuate that his character's not above reproach. And then they try to intimidate him. Intimidation. That's verses 10 through to 14. Scaremongering tactics. You're not going to make it. You're not going to do this. But what happened? We know he made it. We know the enemy is a liar because verse 15 clearly says, so the wall was completed on the 25th of the month Elul in 52 days. He followed through. He stayed with the task, even with all the opposing factors, which were many. And we too have a task that God is calling us to fulfill. I love the very next verse. It says, when all our enemies heard of it, this is the walls completed. When all our enemies heard of it, and all the nations surrounding us saw it, they lost their confidence, for they recognized that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. They saw it. Even their enemies had to admit this was God's work. All will see how great is our God. Jesus said, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. And indeed he did. He said, it is finished. In order to finish that work, Jesus had to keep his focus. He had to embrace the purpose with a single heart. He had to line up his priorities and set his face to go to the cross. What assignments, what tasks has God spoken for you to go and to do and get accomplished? Just like Nehemiah, we all have an assignment with a letter from the King of Kings, King Jesus, saying, go into the world, preach the gospel. This is our assignment. Like Nehemiah, the king gives us his supplies. Everything we need, the resources are there. Everything to accomplish the task. But don't let anything derail you from God's agenda. Why did I choose this portion of scripture tonight? I chose it because I believe we all need to stand firm. We need to rally together and be strong and courageous. We are facing times of opposition and persecution. Maybe small scale here compared to what some of you listening tonight I know are suffering. But we all need to be on our guard all the time. At the beginning of a project, when we rise up and build. Halfway, when we're tempted to throw in the towel and despair. And even in those final stages, we need to see it through. Perhaps tonight you are experiencing the anger of others against you for stepping out for God. Perhaps you're facing mockery and sarcasm. Perhaps you're in a place of discouragement. Perhaps you're exhausted. And you see how much still needs to be done. Perhaps you're tempted to compromise. Maybe you're facing intimidation and even lies against your own character. How will you respond? Remember what Nehemiah did. Keep your focus on God. Depend on him in prayer. Then I prayed. And declare aloud, the God of heaven will give each one of us success. I'm going to leave you with the words of Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, right at the end. He says, thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord. Amen. And to God's name be the glory tonight.